Now then, on to East Africa. The 2011 drought in the Horn of Africa, that was described at the time as the worst to hit the region in 6 decades. Now, though, Kenya's drought response agency is warning that if nothing is done, 2017's drought will be just as bad. By October last year, 1.3 million people were food insecure in the East African state. Kenya's agriculture industry relies almost entirely on rain. In the next 8 weeks, that figure could rise to well over 4 million people. Earlier on, I spoke to James Nyoro, an agricultural economist in the region. As he pointed out, since Kenya's agricultural productivity has been falling for years, this crisis is partly of Kenya's own making.
How much maize does the government buy?
Well, not much.
They buy probably in a significant proportion compared to the production. So if the production is 45 million bags, government is only buying 2 million bags.
Yeah.
So forget about the government buying. The problem in Kenya is that agriculture production and productivity, particularly in maize, has stagnated over a long period of time. So it doesn't matter what the annual incentives are like.
So the state doesn't have the market power to actually change anything in terms of consumption or even strategic reserves?
No, because first of all, if your production is stagnated and you have an increasing population, okay, even under normal circumstances, you still have a gap because we are getting quite a bit of imports from Tanzania and from Uganda. So even in a normal year, we are still getting some, imports into the country. But now put it into a situation where you are in a bad year. It makes a bad situation worse. So Kenya's production or key food crops has stagnated, and we're importing a lot of it. And that needs to be addressed, even in a normal year.
But that's something you never hear about outside of policymaker circles, agricultural circles, like yours. No one, I don't go to conferences and people are talking about the lack or the stagnation of agricultural productivity, at least in the Kenyan context. Why are we ignoring it?
Well, people are talking about it. The problem is whether or not we are doing anything about it, because we have gone on and there's a lot of evidence by FAO, by institutions such as Tegemeo and others, IFPRI, that shows that our productivity is stagnating, and with an increasing population that we are actually increasing our imports. And this country, you know very well that we spend about $1.3 million to import food, basic food.
Yeah.
$1 billion to import basic food. So it is recognized. Whether or not we are doing anything about it, it's another issue altogether.
Right. Let's talk about those countries you mentioned, Tanzania, Uganda, Zambia. These are usually our usual sources of maize. But all of them have been hit particularly badly by drought in the course of the last year. So if, on one hand, our source markets have been hit by drought, and now we're in drought, so we have to plug in that gap with imports. It sounds like we're caught between the proverbial rock and the hard place. So,
under normal circumstances, we've always been importing maize from South Africa. Last year, let's say Southern Africa, because we import maize from Southern Africa, sometimes from Zambia, sometimes even from Malawi. We've gotten maize coming from Malawi anyway. So Southern Tanzania produces excess maize, by the way. Northern Tanzania produces a lot of maize. We're talking about Kilimanjaro region. They produce a lot of maize, which filters into Kenya. Now, southern part of Africa was facing a huge drought last year, which means that is not going to be a source for imports.
Because they've essentially shut down their markets.
Because they haven't even gotten to there. Actually, do you know that maize was being exported from Congo-Brazzaville, where you have South African large-scale farmers, into South Africa? So today they do not have stocks, we cannot get it. The second problem that we are grappling with is that we have banned GMOs into the country. So even if we are to import maize into Kenya, it can only be non-GMO unless we unban
But
GMO.
doesn't that limit our sources? Because South Africa is a huge producer of GM maize. Exactly. The Americans have a lot of GM crops as well, and they're big producers, but we've essentially just locked all their imports out.
Now the source, you see, you have to put in another constraint for the Kenyan market because it must be white maize.
Yes.
The source of white non-GMO maize is very limited. The source of white GMO maize is wide. Argentina, Brazil, South Africa, sometimes when they have a crop, that is wider. But if you have now to go to non-GMO white maize, the source is mainly Mexico and a few other countries. So we are caught between a rock and hard place in this particular time.